Welcome back to Roots Music History. On this podcast, we talk about the stories behind songs and legends, as well as moments in history and history in the making. On today's episode, we are talking about a woman who was, for the longest time, one of the top 10 richest women in Ireland, due to her hit songs with the band The Cranberries. We are talking about the incredible rise and fall of the lead singer, Dolores O'Riordan. You might not immediately recognize her name or the band name. I hope you do. But a lot of people, especially the younger generations, when I say the name Dolores O'Riordan or I say the Cranberries, they don't immediately know who I'm talking about. But I can guarantee you know their songs. For example, their very first song was Linger, and their second hit off of their second album was Zombie. Dolores's voice is just so distinct in these songs. Anytime you hear her voice, you immediately know that it's her. And I think it's the perfect combination of alternative rock and roll with this almost yodeling and all of these different layers and super rapid pitch changes that she just hits each one. She does not miss. It's beautiful to listen to. And then you layer onto that her Irish accent and you've just got a total gold mine of an artist. Dolores was about 23 years old when she finally hit it big and became a superstar. So how did a 23-year-old from the farmlands of Ireland become one of the world's most well-known female vocalists? And how in the world did her life take this complete 180-degree turn, making her one of the most tragic cases in music history? Join me today as we dig up the roots of Dolores O'Riordan and the story behind the Cranberries. Dolores was born on September 6, 1971. She was the ninth born child to Terry and Eileen O'Riordan, although two of those children had died later on in infancy. 3 years before Dolores was born, her father, Terry, suffered a terrible motorbike accident. He actually suffered brain damage that left him ridden to a wheelchair. Prior to Terry's accident, he was a really hard worker on his farm, working to take care of his family and make a living. He also loved music and played the accordion, and Eileen loved to sing, and she would often sing along with Terry playing. According to my records, Terry's accident was in 1968, which would have been 3 years before Dolores was born. There are some reports out there that say Terry had his accident when Dolores was a young child, though, so I'm not completely certain on that, but nonetheless, it was a really tragic moment for the O'Riordan family when Terry had this accident. It completely changed the course of the family forever. Even after Terry's accident, though, he and Eileen would always spend their evenings with the kids, and Terry would play the accordion and Eileen would sing. Terry was 34 years old when Dolores was born, and he and Eileen and the family were already settled in a little community called Ballybricken, which is just about 11 miles east of the county Limerick in Ireland. Ballybricken was a super small town, although it did have one shop, a post office, and one pub. Ballybricken was mainly known for being a really close-knit Catholic farming community. There are just over 1,000 people in Ballybricken today, so I can only imagine how small it was back in the 70s when Dolores would have been growing up there. And after her father's accident, the community didn't hesitate to help the O'Riordans however they could. Through the family's health and financial challenges following Terry's accident, music became a very routine part of their evenings. The O'Riordan family was obviously really big, and all of the kids loved to sing along to their dads playing in the evenings. But everyone always seemed to be paying special attention to Dolores and her voice versus the other kids. She recalls her uncles would come over and they would say, "Listen to that little one sing. Listen to that one." And then they'd take her into the pub in town so others could hear her sing too. It became only natural after Dolores got used to singing around family and friends that she began singing in the church choir of their small community church. Soon after joining the choir, she became a designated soloist for Sunday services. services. I did some research into the churches in Ballybricken, and I believe she probably attended this church. It's called St. Alby's in Ballybricken, and this is where her funeral mass took place. This church is very quaint and small, and as you can tell, it holds a lot of history. It had been a church since 1809, but the building itself is believed to date back even further. The sandstone font on the entrance is believed to date back to the medieval times. Right next to the church is a graveyard that, as legend has it, is where St. Alby, the saint the church is named after, is laying at rest. Even in the early 1970s, when Dolores and her family were attending services here, the church held an incredible amount of history then, and even more now, obviously, now that Dolores has made such an impact on the world and on music history. Eileen and Terry felt really fortunate to be part of this small, tight-knit community, and were very grateful to everyone who stepped up to help after Terry's accident. Little did the O'Riordans know, but their family was in for more trouble than they ever could have bargained for. When Dolores was 7 years old, her sister Angela accidentally burned their house down. Needless to say, this was a devastating tragedy for the 7 kids that were living under that roof at the time, and Terry and Eileen. The house they lost was a really cute 2-bedroom home with a kitchen that Dolores remembers was just always full of food. Her favorite memories from her childhood there were these warm, good dinners she said were always on the table, and the fact that every child always had a good night's sleep in a warm bed and clean clothes to wear in the morning. She describes her childhood as minimal but incredibly spiritual and very happy for the most part. Although later on, she did describe someone she trusted very much. She didn't say who. It wasn't either of her parents, but it could have been an uncle, it could have been a priest. It's hard to say who it was, but she does say someone began, I can't say the words because of YouTube, but someone began doing bad things to her as a child, and it was really traumatic for her. But her parents were very good parents. She just remembers her mom always being in the kitchen. They always had family dinners. The house was filled with so much love and so much happiness, despite all of their hardships. Every night, she said her father would have the whole family kneel in the living room, and he'd say the rosary, and all the children would say their Hail Marys. In Dolores's words, it was a very old, romantic Irish childhood that she thought was really beautiful. After the home burned down, the family was forced to rebuild again. And again, the amazing community they were a part of came together to raise money for the family to move into a new farmstead. And in true O'Riordan form, in the face of trauma and hardship, they continued to fill their home with music. And Dolores was always the star of all the family songs. For the next few years, she became a regular at the local pub, and she remembers the pub patrons would remember her when she walked in the door, and they would say, "There's that little girl who sings. Hey, come on over here, sing us a song." She said she loved Dolly Parton, so she would often cover songs by Dolly, but she would sing everything under the sun. She never really latched on to one particular artist. She always just sang whatever her heart was feeling on that particular day. The school Dolores ended up going to was Laurel Hill Secondary School. It was an all-girls school, and it had an incredible amount of history, just like her church. Her school dated back to 1845. When Dolores was 12 years old, she was admitted to the all-girls school. The school was for children ages 12 through 19. Her school principal famously told the Limerick Post that on Dolores's first day of school, she stood up in front of all of her classmates and said, "My name is Dolores, and I'm going to be a rock star." It was about 1983 when Dolores would have started at the school, and her parents made sure she was set to attend the school all the way through the age of 19. They wanted to make sure they had the finances to do this. They made sure she always had clean clothes and the books that she needed. They were extremely supportive of Dolores and setting Dolores up and all of her siblings up to have the best life possible. In 1989, there were 2 brothers who lived in nearby Limerick who decided to start a band. Their names were Mike and Noel Hogan. They recruited a drummer named Fergal Lawler and a singer named Neil Quinn. They called themselves The Cranberries Saw Us. I don't know, but that was their band name. When the lead singer decided to leave the band in 1990, his girlfriend told Mike and Noel that she knew a girl who could sing really well and was looking for a band that was passionate about playing original material. Obviously, this girl was Dolores. It's unclear to me if Dolores technically graduated from school or not. It seems like she did in the interviews that she gives and her rhetoric. It seems like she made it all the way through till 1990 when she turned 19 and graduated from this school. Although a lot of the articles online say she left school to join the Cranberries. I actually don't think that's the case because the school was for girls ages 12 through 19. And if she was enrolled at age 12, that would have been 1983, she would have been graduating in the year 1990, the same year that she joined the Cranberries, which at the time were the Cranberries Saw Us, by the way. I'm saying the Cranberries, but I'm referring to them, Mike and Noel. And she also says in her interviews, when people ask, was your mother upset that you were going rock and roll? Was she worried about you? She always says no, because my mother knew I was a good kid. She knew that I cared about my success. She knew that I was level-headed. And so it seems to me she probably graduated school, because answering that question in interviews, if she had left school to join a band, I think she would have mentioned something like that impacting her mother's feelings towards her turning towards music. So it really just seems to me, the way the school was set up, the years and the timing, that she probably graduated from the school and finished her education there. Her friend was the girlfriend of the lead singer of the Cranberries Saw Us. She got Dolores the opportunity to drive into Limerick and meet with the boys and see if they would be a good fit for a band. The boys thought she was okay, but it wasn't until they heard her sing the song Linger they knew she was the right singer for them. The song Linger was not only what got Dolores hired by Mike and Noel, it's also the song that eventually gained the attention of Island Records, who signed the band in 1991. After getting signed to Island Records, the band changed their name officially to the Cranberries and began focusing on their first debut album. They called this album Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We? And this was released in 1993. After the album's release, the band took off on tour as a supporting act to another band called Suede. By 1993, the Cranberries had made it to the US with the song Linger being their main single. And at this time, they were on a second tour supporting another band called Duran Duran. While on tour with Duran Duran, Dolores found herself smitten with Duran Duran's tour manager, Don Burton. Don was 9 years her senior. He was 31 years old, and Dolores was just 22, but the two were immediately kindred spirits. Don had already been married and divorced and had one son named Donnie, whom Dolores also immediately fell in love with. In a motherly way. I mean, I said that in a weird way. During this time, the song Linger had peaked at number 3 in Ireland, but had yet to really make momentum in the US. They actually had to re-release the song Linger in the US in 1994 before it started charting on the US charts, which I think is super interesting. Stevie Nicks said this in one of her interviews, and this phrase just stuck with me. She said, sometimes you have a really good song, but the timing just isn't there, and you have to wait. The song has to wait for the right timing. Or, as we call it on Roots Music History, you have to have that divine music intervention moment, which, by the way, you can buy my divine music intervention mugs and other divine music intervention merchandise on the Roots Music merchandise store, which is linked down below and in the description box. Now, the year 1994 proved to be one of the best years of Dolores's life, but it did not start off that way. It was the beginning of 1994 when Dolores was skiing in the Alps when she suddenly suffered a terrible accident and injured her knee pretty badly. Now fast forward to the summer of 1994, and she reaches an incredible high when she and Don decided to get married at the Holy Cross Abbey in Tipperary, Ireland, which, by the way, if you have never heard about or read about the Holy Cross Abbey in Ireland, it is an incredible place with incredible history. I'm going to put a link to the Holy Cross Abbey, one of the videos I like about it, in the description down below if you want to go check it out and really appreciate the history there. It is just a beautiful place. and the perfect spot for Dawn and Dolores to tie the knot. Later, in September of 1994, the Cranberries released Zombie as their single to their 94 album, No Need to Argue. Ever since Dolores' accident, she had to do a lot of physical therapy on her knee, pretty much on a daily basis. But later in the year, once Zombie really started to take off, Dolores let that physical therapy on her knee really take a backseat, which made the injury only get worse. Dolores was set to have surgery in 1994, but the Ireland healthcare system, gotta love it, kept postponing her surgery. She ended up not having surgery on her knee until June of 1996. It was really hard to perform. You know, in her shows, she wanted to be jumping up and down and be animated, and that was just not possible with this knee injury. And if you've ever had an injury like that too, it can really kind of take a toll on your mood. It was around Christmas when this all kind of came to a head. Dolores was at Disneyland and was getting off of a ride when she bumped her knee on the edge of the ride. She was in excruciating pain after this, and she believes bumping her knee this way made it even worse, on top of all of the touring that she had been doing and on top of slacking with her physical therapy. But she had to keep pushing through. The band was doing remarkably well. And in her words, you've really got to shoot while the ducks are in the air. I mean, those weren't her exact words, but that was pretty much what she was saying was we were getting all of this attention and all of this momentum. And if you don't grab it and ride it and appreciate it, that could go away. It could be gone. Dolores really didn't want to kill that buzz by having a knee injury and saying, I've got to rest. I've got to just sit down and do nothing. So in April of 1996, the band released their third album called To the Faithful Departed. But this album really wasn't met with nearly as much enthusiasm as their first and second album. And a local paper from that summer of 1996, I think, encompassed people's feelings perfectly. They said, the Cranberries, whose lead singer, Dolores O'Riordan, is so gorgeous that we forgive them for their last CD. Everyone loved Dolores, loved her vibe, loved her energy, but they just were not loving the third album. And then a few months after releasing that third album, Dolores went in for surgery on her knee, and they ended up canceling a very large portion of their 1996 Australian tour because Dolores had to have this procedure done. They received a lot of backlash for this, but Dolores kept her head high and said, I honestly think people understand that I'm sick and my knee is hurt and I've got to have a procedure on it and I've got to start taking care of my body because if I don't, nobody else will. And what good am I to the world if I'm just crippled? But I think at the same time, even though Dolores was standing her ground that she needed a break and needed to tend to her knee, she was also struggling with backing out of the limelight. She started to struggle a little bit with her mental health. Now, during this time and throughout her life, she was very open and admitted she used alcohol as an escape. She said it seemed like the safest vice that was out there. And eventually during this time, she did go see a psychologist who took one look at her and said, look, you're a celebrity, you're on tour, you have a lot going on. Everything that I'm seeing in you is completely normal, especially for a rock star. And you know, a lot of celebrities and rock stars are even worse. They're doing drugs, they're doing heroin, they're doing all sorts of things. And for Dolores, she was just drinking alcohol at night in her hotel room. She wasn't out doing really hard stuff. So her psychologist ultimately told her during this time, you just need to take a break. So that is exactly what Dolores did. And then in 1997, Dawn and Dolores welcomed their first child, a son named Taylor Baxter. After Taylor's birth, Dolores's life completely turned around for the better. She went from being visibly tired and skinny and run down to vibrant and happy and grounded. Her and Dawn were splitting their time between Canada, where Dawn was from, and Ireland, but their main home was in Canada. And Dolores loved being a mother. It was the most important thing to Dolores, was taking care of Taylor. And she remembered those feelings of being alone in a hotel room, not having a home, not having a family, not having anything grounding her, not having a life outside of music. And she she just didn't want to live that way anymore. She needed to have this family experience. And to do that, she had to let go of the Cranberries, at least for a little while. Dolores really did go quiet during these years. It wasn't until 1999 when it seemed like she was ready to emerge from her cocoon. And Taylor, her son, was now about 2 years old. He was a toddler. Dolores started making appearances again and doing live shows. And the Cranberries also started writing and working on another album. But critics were hesitant to receive more music from them. Ben Rayner, a pop music critic, wrote in April of 1999, quote, "As charming as their first album was, the Irish quartet's unconvincing, increasingly self-righteous tone made their next two records a little hard to take." He described the song Zombie specifically, as many described it, as having too much of a political theme and coming off as preachy. It seemed like the Cranberries did take a lot of this feedback as constructive criticism, because in their next album, Bury the Hatchet, they kind of tried to go back to that light-hearted nature of their original song Linger that had initially gotten them so much fame and positivity in the first place. Dolores started speaking out in interviews saying, "You know, I used to care about politics. I used to care about trying to make a difference with my words." But she said, eventually, I just realized I'm just upsetting myself and I don't need to save the world. She said the world is always going to have its problems, and I just don't want to sing about politics anymore, and I don't want to sing about the world's problems. I want to sing about happier things and more lighthearted things. And that's the direction the Cranberries started to go in 1999. And then they started touring for that new album, Bury the Hatchet, and they thought the tour was going really well, but not everyone was having it. The Montreal Gazette reported on one of the Cranberries' shows from that Saturday night on August 28, 1999, that Sunday, with a headline that said, "Not so tart." And the subheader read, "Cranberries leave bad taste with uninspired performance." Cranberries leave bad taste. I had to chuckle at that. But a lot of people were not loving them anymore. But despite the bad press like this, their shows were still often sold out. Although some people said that the Cranberry fans seemed to be determined to have a good time, despite the music not being so great. And also, many folks reported that the crowd was always way more enthusiastic and engaged with the opening acts rather than the headliner, the Cranberries. After this tour, Dolores was ready for another career break, and on January 27th, 2001, she got it when she gave birth to her daughter, Molly Lee, who, by the way, looks identical to her. When she got pregnant with Molly, she was super busy doing live shows and traveling. She was all over the place. She was surprised when she found out she was pregnant, but she was also really excited and wanted Taylor, her son, to have a sibling so he wouldn't be alone. Also by 2001, Dolores and Dawn had moved back to Limerick, where her whole family still was, so they could raise their kids with their family around them. The house Dawn built for them in Canada took a while to sell, though. Apparently there were a ton of bars in the house, like 4 or 5 different bars. And one of them was almost like the Playboy Mansion, the original Playboy Mansion, where you walked in and then the floor had a hole and a pole, and you could jump on the pole and fall down and land in another bar that he built. So it was a little quirky, and it did sit on the market for a little bit of time, but eventually it sold and they were able to 100% relocate to Limerick, Ireland, where Dolores was one of the top 10 richest women due to her fame and success. Now, even though Dawn and Dolores clearly loved alcohol and loved to drink, it was not a problem for them. They seemed super grounded. Dolores was surrounded by her family in Ireland. She was raising her children with the same spiritual appreciation and appreciation for the history around them that she grew up with. And it just seemed like they were living a really good, grounded life, albeit with a little sprinkle of fun. Dolores repeatedly would say how she loved being a mother and how being a mother kept her grounded. In a lot of ways, especially looking back on Dolores in hindsight, I almost tend to think that her life could have ended up so much differently if she hadn't had children and didn't have that opportunity to be a mother. But the fact she had Taylor and Molly, and then eventually in 2005, she also gave birth to Dakota Rain, another daughter. The fact that she had all three of these children and the way that the children were spaced out over the years, I really think she could have had her downward spiral way sooner had it not been for Taylor, Molly, and Dakota. They were just the apple of her eye. They were the reason for her existence. She had Dakota Rain in 2005. It was from 2003 to about 2008, she was quiet again. She had another hiatus, and the band had another hiatus. In fact, many people thought the Cranberries were done and they would never come back. I think they went a total of 6 years not even seeing each other. It wasn't until 2009 Dolores reunited with Mike and Noel. They decided to do another tour and released another album. In 2010, Dolores and the Cranberries were getting really good press with this tour and having a really good time. In 2012, they kicked off another tour. This tour was worldwide, and this tour ended up being really fun for the Cranberries. I think the Hogan brothers said it best in an interview on February 28th, 2012. Noel said, quote, "My shock was to see young people in the audience." And then Mike added, "During our break, all these kids were discovering our music on the internet, and they never thought we were ever going to play live again." Noel and Mike and Dolores were just having the time of their life, realizing that a younger generation had not only discovered their music, but discovered their music and were loving it, and were excited to see them live. After that tour ended, the Cranberries were so pumped and excited, they decided to start booking studio time right away to work on another album. Even though they had no management contract, no manager, no record label, nothing, they just booked studio time and went in and started writing. They were shooting while the ducks were in the air. And it was from this energy and enthusiasm that their next album, Roses, came to life. In 2013, Dolores would later admit, years later, that in 2013, she tried to OD. Now, she obviously came out on the other end of that episode, and she concluded to herself that it was just because she was, quote, meant to stay here for the kids. But the public never knew that this episode occurred. In fact, many people were watching Dolores on the late night show and doing interviews, and she seemed vibrant and happy and healthy, always talking about her children and how much it meant to her to be their mother. And it wasn't really clear either if Dolores was talking about drugs or alcohol when she used the term overdose. She always said she did not do drugs and did not like the idea of those chemical compounds going in her. She did admit that she would take sleeping pills now and again, especially if she had been drinking, she would take a sleeping pill. But she said she always felt safe drinking. She admitted many times that she could be a binge drinker, but she never admitted to doing any of the hard stuff. And to a lot of people, it just seemed like a regular person going home, having a couple beers, having a couple glasses of wine, passing out, going to sleep. But when you are binge drinking, that is not healthy. That is not safe. And, no matter what, I think what is so upsetting to me about the story of Dolores O'Riordan is that society and our culture normalizes binge drinking, and that's not okay. She said, if I'm going to have a vice, if I'm going to have an escape, it's going to be through alcohol. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put that stuff in my body. But yet she was going home and having several glasses of whatever and then taking a sleeping pill and going to bed. I think Dolores is a wake-up call that you can't live that way. In an interview that Dolores gave to the Mirror UK, she said, quote, in her own words, "I am pretty good, but sometimes I hit the bottle. Everything is way worse the next morning. I have a bad day when I have bad memories and I can't control them. And I hit the bottle. I kind of binge drink. That is kind of my biggest flaw at the moment. On tour, it's just so easy to say, I can't sleep. I'll have a couple of drinks. Maybe I'll take one more. And then you take another. And then you fall asleep and you don't wake up. And that can happen." She said, but I'm careful now, insinuating that she didn't really do that anymore. And if you want to consider that a red flag statement, then that would have been the only red flag statement or observation the public had about Dolores. It wasn't until 2014 when people kind of started raising their eyebrows at a very unexpected headline. It was November 11th, 2014, when it was reported that the Cranberries singer had been arrested for double assault on a flight that was going from JFK in New York City to Ireland. What was even more shocking and weird were the details that she, quote, stepped on a flight attendant's foot. Actually, the exact word was stomped. She stomped on a flight attendant's foot and then headbutted and spit on an officer. Everyone was just like, what? Dolores? Now, this was a red-eye flight, and this whole altercation started about 20 minutes before they landed. Dolores was flying business class, and apparently there was a kerfuffle up there about 20 minutes before landing as they were descending. And then things got quiet. It seemed like the kerfuffle kind of calmed down. But then once the plane landed, there seemed to be another kerfuffle with the same woman, Dolores. This is all according to a witness who was back in coach. It seemed like she had obviously had too much to drink, and she stood up about 20 minutes before landing, maybe to go to the bathroom, when a flight attendant very sternly told her to sit back down. Dolores didn't want to sit back down. She said something, there was some sort of kerfuffle, but supposedly she did sit back down and everything kind of calmed down. But then, as soon as the plane landed and that fasten seatbelt sign was still on, Dolores stood up again, and again the flight attendant more sternly said, sit back down. And then Dolores stomped on the flight attendant's foot. She was also reportedly hitting the top of the overhead compartments, screaming, I pay my taxes. And then she stomped on the flight attendant's foot and maybe went to the bathroom, if that's what she was doing, or I don't know. But a witness in coach reported all of this. She said she heard a woman thumping the ceiling and screaming at the flight crew, saying she paid her taxes. And it's just, as I was reading this newspaper article, all I could think about was that scene in Bridesmaids where the curtain between first class and coach keeps opening and shutting, and she's having this altercation with the flight attendant because the woman in coach said the curtain suddenly closed between coach and first class once this kerfuffle started. And all I could think about was her going, there's a woman on the wing. Anyway, it was really surprising to people to see this headline, especially because Dolores was always so soft-spoken and sweet. So she has this altercation with the flight attendant. It must have been, by the way, a pretty hard stomp because the flight attendant ended up having to go to the hospital for a fractured foot. The pilot calls for the police to meet them at the gate. Once they get there, that's when Dolores headbutted one of them and then spit in their face. Not very good. And all of this happened in 2014. Little did anyone know at the time, but Dolores would only have about 4 years left to live. It wasn't until December of 2015, almost a whole year later, this finally played out in court, and Dolores pled guilty to assaulting 3 police officers and the flight attendant. Before Dolores's testimony in court, she saw a psychologist again and was diagnosed clinically with bipolar disorder. Then in court, she alleged she was having a psychotic episode. She was fined $6,000 that she gave to charity, and she left the courthouse urging others who were mentally ill to seek help. And then she thanked her doctors for her recovery. A few weeks after this incident, she told her fans she would be using music and dancing to overcome her health battles. And she didn't waste any time keeping this promise because in 2017, the Cranberries were back. This time, with the backing of an orchestra, which was very unexpected to Cranberry fans everywhere. And even though fans definitely didn't see an orchestra ever accompanying the Cranberries, they also really did not expect what would be happening to Dolores just 1 year later. The world was absolutely stunned when on January 16th, 2008, Dolores made headlines in a different section of the newspaper, the obituaries. Her death was announced on Facebook on Tuesday the 16th. All the announcement really said was that she had suddenly died at a London hotel. It didn't give any details as to what happened or how she was found, but her initial cause of death, according to the British inquest, was that she had been found after drowning in a bathtub after drinking too much alcohol. Dolores was just 46 years old. She left behind her son Taylor, who was only 20 at the time, her daughter Molly, who was 16, and a 12-year-old Dakota Rain. And after her autopsy confirmed she died by alcohol intoxication, everyone started looking at an incident that had occurred in 2004 a little bit differently. Back in 2004, a nanny came forward for the O'Riordans, claiming really horrible working conditions. And one of those horrible conditions, she said, was heavy drinking. On April 22nd, 2004, the Irish Times reported that the husband of the Cranberries singer Dolores O'Riordan had denied allegations by the couple's former nanny that, with a beer in one hand, he had taken their baby son Taylor out on a jet ski without a life jacket on a lake in Canada in 1999. Apparently, the nanny was saying this happened and she was really concerned about their drinking and their party lifestyle. But the two of them denied this and just said, yeah, I mean, we like to drink, but not any more than any other couple, and it's never been a problem. Now, at the time that this happened, back in 2004, Dawn Burton was 41 years old. Dawn and Dolores were elated when this entire case was dismissed. Nobody really ever thought of it again. In fact, a lot of people thought the nanny was probably just trying to get her 10 minutes of fame. But fast forward to 2018, and you start to see the downward spiral of Dolores, the separation between her and Dawn and the boyfriend, Ole. And then you have the very last voicemail that Dolores ever left, where Dolores just sounds messy.
Monday, January 15th at 1:12 a.m. Hi, Dan. It's Dolores. I'm in London. I'm at the Hyatt Park Hilton. Anyways, if you want me to come in and question this, actually, I think it's fucking awesome. It sounds fucking terribly good. I'll fucking come into the studio. You name your time. Okay, Dan Ways, and send my love to Irene. I still have that leather jacket. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Now, this message was left by Dolores to her longtime friend, who was a record label executive named Dan Waite. And she left this just hours before she died. It was reportedly time-stamped around 1:12 a.m. London time, just a few hours before Dolores was slated to go into a studio to cover her song Zombie. Then she goes on to talk about the cover that she is about to do for Zombie, and she says, quote, "Actually, I think it's effing awesome. It sounds effing terribly good." The voicemail only lasted for about 30 seconds, and she goes on to invite Dan over to the studio so that he can hear it for himself, and then she sends her love to his wife, Irene. She sounds drunk in the voicemail, if you ask me. And I think it is really important to tell Dolores' story because she was raised in such a grounded home. Her family was so spiritual and so grounded, and she was a grounded person, so it seemed, all the way up through her life, raising her kids. And she always said it was so important to her to make sure she had good people in her life to watch her kids while she was out on tour, while she was out working, so that she knew they would have that stability and they would have those good influences in their lives. She just always told herself it wasn't a big deal. She always thought alcohol was safe. Now, her kids are seemingly doing incredibly well. Molly Lee, I'm going to link an article about her in the description down below. Like I said, she looks just like her mother. I think she is now 23 years old. Dakota and Molly seem to be pretty private people, but Taylor is an internet personality. You can find him on Facebook and Instagram. I think he has a YouTube as well. I'll put all of his information in the description down below if you want to check him out. I believe all three of the kids are now still living in Canada. And for anyone who is a fan of the Cranberries, we still have their music on Spotify and YouTube Music. Anywhere that you can find music, you can still find music from the Cranberries. I will also link the Spotify to the Cranberries in the description down below so that you can give them a follow. If you like this type of content, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support the channel at no cost at all. And if you would like, there is an option to give a super thanks. A super thanks is a button at the bottom of the play bar that allows you to donate any amount of money that you would like to the channel and to the telling of these stories. I am so eternally grateful to anyone who has ever given me a super thanks. Telling these stories is so important to me. I love music and I love history, and I think there's something so magical about these stories. So the fact that you guys have donated to me the way that you have, I've been able to improve the setup, improve the studio here, and I can take those donations and put them towards all of the subscriptions that are necessary for me to do my research and put on this programming. So thank you so much to anyone who has ever done that. And like I mentioned in the middle of the episode, you can also buy a Divine Music Intervention mug or shirt or other type of accessory. I just revamped the whole Divine Music Intervention store, so I hope you like it. I am also launching a Guitar Daddy line, which I'm very excited about. So go ahead and check out the store, and you will probably also see by the time this comes out the Guitar Daddy mugs and shirts and hats and things like that. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really hope that you enjoyed this story about Dolores and the Cranberries. If you have any memories or thoughts on the Cranberries, I'd be very interested to know them. I know that not everyone loved the Cranberries, and I think what's so funny about them is they never really stuck to one thing. And I think it's because Dolores admits this. She never latched on to just one artist or one type of music as a kid. She would sing everything. She didn't care. You know, she was like a box of chocolates. You never knew what you were going to get out of Dolores. She actually started writing pop songs as a teenager and then later kind of went into this rock and roll vibe. But then the Cranberries surprised everyone when they brought in the orchestra. So it was just, you never really had that consistency with the Cranberries. Maybe this is going to be a controversial statement, but I think it's been hard for them to have just a steady fan base because of that. A lot of people think they're a little weird, a little out there, which they are, but you can't deny that the song Linger and Dreams and Zombie have really impacted musicians everywhere, and nobody can replicate Dolores's voice. It is so distinct and so beautiful. I will take you to the parking lot on that because I absolutely love her voice. Just love her voice. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will see you on the next Roots Rockumentary.
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my freedoms down Liberty Avenue.